I want to like go back a little bit and talk about what I learned about breath from having both of my lungs collapsed in a tragic accident. So that was in 1981, and after the accident, the pulmonary technician that tested me showed that I had only about 60% capacity of my respiratory capacity was 60% of what was expected. I was just always completely out of breath and just always gasping for breath any time I did anything, until I went to the Ayurvedic Center and met Deepak Chopra, but I also met John Diard, and he focused on breathing practices to enhance athletic performance, which is just what I needed. So I really went into studying the breath and how to expand and improve respiratory capacity, and it just changed the whole way and was a very big part of my learning, and also a big part of I taught hundreds of people how to breathe, and I taught like master yoga teachers. I think this one lady was a senior instructor in Iyengar yoga, studied with the master B.K. Iyengar, studied with him, and she had a heart condition and came to me because she didn't want to get a surgery, and somehow she found me. I don't know how, but she found me, and within 2 or 3 weeks of teaching her how to breathe, it completely shifted her heart condition. She didn't have to have the surgery. So I had this ability to teach breath and and the way I taught it was unexplainable. And because it was different for each person, I was having a lot of trouble figuring out how I could market it, how I could tell people what I did and how profound it was. Trying to come up with a name for it. What is it? We called it, I tried to talk about it, exercise for the heart, or nothing really carried the intention. And I'd always ask people, what would you call this? And because I'm just teaching you how to breathe, Yeah, I went to this guy and I paid him $500 to teach me how to breathe. And it's like, nobody could get that. And so the only people that came to me were, I don't know how they found me, because it was really hard to describe or whatever. They just, I had a wrong number call me one time and ended up teaching her. It was bizarre. The closest I ever came was this one person said, "You're not teaching me how to breathe. This is a transmission." So anyway, this way of exercising and using the breath and everything, and I went to met a naturopath that I really liked, And he gave me some breathing exercises with this guy from Russia, I can't remember how to say his name, but it starts with a B, from Russia. And I read it over and I said, man, I know all there is to know about breathing, I thought. I'm not going to, And so I didn't read it, and I didn't do it. And then several years later, I heard about this same guy again, and then there's the Wim Hof breathing technique, and I tried that. Well, yeah, but I finally, after getting this information that I should read about this breathing technique, I got a book on it called The Oxygen Advantage, and I couldn't put it down once I started reading it, because the breath is not nearly as simple as I thought it was. Because what is important is not getting oxygen into the blood, onto the hemoglobin. What's important is getting the oxygen off of the hemoglobin into the plasma, where it can then go into the tissue. Okay? So the mechanism for releasing the oxygen off of the hemoglobin requires a high concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood. That triggers the hemoglobin to let go of the oxygen. So if you are breathing efficiently, you're getting lots of oxygen onto the hemoglobin, but that oxygen may not be being released into the plasma, where it can then get to the tissue where it's needed. And what it turns out is that it's very easy to overbreathe, and then your body gets used to a lower concentration of CO2 in the blood, and then and so the overbreathing is just exactly what you don't need. The whole focus of this, the Wim Hof and the Borenko, this Russian guy, was to restrict the breath, to build up carbon dioxide in the blood, and then breathe. And so when I was talking to this LiveO2 guy, what that system does is exactly that. You breathe pure oxygen, and then you switch it to high altitude, really low oxygen. So you go from breathing 95% oxygen to breathing 10% oxygen, which is, the air has about 20. And what that does is it builds up CO2 in the blood. The oxygen is released off of the hemoglobin. The O2 saturation goes down, but the oxygen in the plasma stays the same because there's more carbon dioxide in the blood, and the oxygen goes off of the hemoglobin. And then you switch it back to pure oxygen while it still has that high CO2 in the blood. And so you get this big blast of oxygen onto the hemoglobin, which immediately gets released into the plasma. So and the fact that you're exercising and your heart rate is up, it pushes that oxygen into tissues and organs where it may have not had oxygen for a really long time. And so so it's the adaptive contrast that really amps up the efficiency of the O2 getting into the plasma and into the tissue. There's a way to do it naturally without that. And this is what a lot of the rishis in the Himalayas did. What the Russians discovered was that as they were training their athletes, if they trained them at a high altitude where there was less oxygen, and they lived at that high altitude, there was very little improvement in their performance when they came down to a lower altitude to compete. However, if they trained at a high altitude and then came down to a lower altitude, is where they lived and slept, and then they'd go back up to the high altitude and train, they got a dramatic increase in performance. And that's because training at the high altitude got them used to more carbon dioxide in the blood, and then coming down to a lower altitude and breathing the oxygen-enriched air at the lower altitude, their bodies healed more dramatically than if they'd have just stayed up there at the low oxygen. And so their performance was enhanced because they got healthier. Not because of the training, but because they got healthier. And so this LiveO2 then is a way to like supercharge the healing potential of exercise. And it's very effective when, of course, when coupled with the intention and the understanding and changing other malignant aspects of your life, mental, emotional, your diet, your routine, the stress in your life. This can be a very powerful modality to change those patterns in your life that no longer serve you, to make that growth in consciousness and discover more of who you really are. So, yeah. So there, that's kind of full circle from my first desire to heal myself in college with exercise, and it almost killed me, to really understanding the power and the mechanism that enables exercise to be a very beneficial tool for healing, physical, mental, and emotional.